Stay tuned now for Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome, everybody, to Westchester Eye on the Radio. I'm Peter Moses with my co-host John Sharan and Ardina Seward. How are you guys today?
Doing well.
I'm enjoying the return of summer.
Yeah, I'm going to Ohio for a few days later this week, and the weather forecast, according to weather.com, is 4 days of thunderstorms.
And possibly tornadoes, no?
I didn't read anything about tornadoes. But you know, when you hear about weather patterns and you hear about the Ohio Valley, right, there is no such place. Mm-hmm. It's the Miami Valley. No, that's the truth. It's the Miami Valley, but they can't call it that nationally because people will get mixed up with Florida,
the Miami Beach, right?
Miami,
but or the city of Miami, but it's a part of Ohio where there's a Miami River, a Great Miami River, and then there's the Small Miami River, and it was a Native American tribe. So it's known in Ohio as the Miami Valley. And the Miami Valley is giving me nothing but a veil of tears for 4 days. Now, today we have a guest on that Ardina set up, as our 85 to 90% of our guests. Ardina, for the past almost 2 years now,
right, 2 years,
has been booking almost all of our shows. Next week's and the week after, not the case. But so today, when she sent me and when she sent John information on the guest today, his name is Rick Allen Ross, I wrote back to her and I said, "Oh, a guest on a quest." And I think that probably fits. Would you agree with that, Rick Allen Ross, that you're a guest on a quest?
Well, I don't know. You could say that I started out as an anti-cult activist and a community organizer, but now I think it's more about education and raising awareness.
Isn't it the same thing with just a different blanket? Isn't that the same bed isn't that the same bed with a different blanket?
Maybe. You know, you might say that I'm on a quest in the sense that I'd like to see the public more informed, and certainly I think Keith Raniere, the leader of NXIVM, the so-called sex cult that's been busted in the Albany area, and now he's sitting over in a federal detention center in protective custody in Brooklyn. I think he felt I was on a quest. He sued me for 14 years and lost, and then shortly thereafter, he got arrested, and some of the ringleaders of the group, for sex trafficking and racketeering.
I'm assuming you don't ever buy any Seagram products because of this guy, do you?
I see you've been following the case.
For those of you who don't know...
Claire Bronfman and her sister Sarah. Claire is they're heiresses to the Seagram's liquor fortune. They pumped an incredible amount of money into the coffers of Keith Raniere. They lost a lot of money.
They did.
Now Claire Bronfman is free on $100 million bail bond.
That's tip money. That's tip money.
Pardon?
That's tip money.
Well, I think the Bronfmans, each sister might have anywhere from $300 to $500 million, according to what I've heard.
Do you want to hear a Bronfman story that you may? Yeah. You remember when their brother was arrested many years ago? I wasn't arrested. Their brother many years ago was kidnapped.
Was that Edgar?
No.
Edgar's brother.
No, that was Edgar Senior's son.
Edgar Senior's son, yeah.
I went to summer camp with him, and somebody from the local newspaper in Westchester called me up and said, "Someone told me you went to camp with Sam Bronfman." And I went, "Yeah, I did." "Well, what do you think about what happened?" I said, "Either it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy, or he planned it himself." And it turned out he planned his own kidnapping. It was a false kidnapping. So the Bronfmans are damaged goods. They're not like the great-great-grandfather who...
Well, they certainly seem to have had their share of problems. I think Edgar Bronfman Sr. was a really great man.
Yes.
And he did wonderful work for the World Jewish Congress. And what he did for Holocaust survivors regarding restitution and consideration, particularly the deal that he helped to negotiate with the Swiss and others who benefited from the Holocaust. I think Edgar Bronfman, in that sense, he was just an amazing man.
I would agree.
And by the way, from a financial standpoint, he actually increased the family fortune. But I would say that
well, his
subsequently his kids were a disappointment.
His namesake son, certainly lost enough money when he bought Warner Brothers Music, didn't he?
Right. You know, there was a saying in Hollywood back in the day that one guy said that Edgar Bronfman Jr. was like a piñata. You hit him and money comes out, and so he. Well,
I'm gonna have to interrupt. Rick, I'm gonna have to interrupt you because we're going to our first break. We have with us today Rick Allen Ross, and he's going to talk about cults when we get back, and he's going to talk about the parallels between some of the fringe Trump supporters and cultism. This is Westchester Eye on the radio, on WVOX and WVOX.com. We're about to go to a Fox News break and a Fox Business break, from which we will emerge with more pearls of wisdom. We'll see you on the other side of this commercial and news break.
And now with Fox News commentary, here's Fox News Radio's Todd Starnes on 1460 WVOX.
Across facts that disconfirm what President Trump says, that contradict what they wish to believe about him, they go into a kind of spin that is provided by President Trump and also perpetuated by a kind of media bubble, a combination of social media, websites, broadcasts that reinforce whatever the spin is from the top. And in this way, people can not believe what they see, not believe the news reports, even from established news sources like Associated Press, Reuters, who have no skin in the game politically at all, and just simply go with the spin that is provided. That is very similar to a destructive cult, in the sense that there is a kind of information control, there is a kind of bubble or cocoon around the people, and we see this even though we live in the information age, where there is just incredible flow of information through the web, through the net, and yet with all that information, people can choose to very selectively relegate their little kind of bubble populated by their friends on Facebook, following certain people on Twitter, watching their kind of alternate reality on YouTube and through various websites. And they can choose a television network. If they're to the right, Fox; if they're to the left, MSNBC. And they can kind of cocoon themselves and create a kind of false, what we would call social proof, that no matter what, they're right. And that is a very unsettling aspect of cults, and it's something that you can see to some extent with the kind of personality-driven and self-confirming nature of the Trump phenomenon.
How much are we seeing that in terms of the Kavanaugh nomination? Because there was a statistic that was floating around that says 40 or 45% of evangelicals say that they would support Kavanaugh even if the accusations were true. Now,
yeah, there was a Marist poll, and it was 48% of white evangelicals would support Judge Kavanaugh regardless of whether the allegations are true, and it's disconcerting to see that. I mean, particularly from people who really have repeatedly said that what they're all about is family values.
So where does that road lead us?
Well, I mean, the good news is that we vote. And so unlike Jonestown, unlike NXIVM, led by Keith Raniere or some other totalitarian cult, we can vote to change things. And so people who didn't vote in the last election cycle, I say to them, shut up, don't complain. And people who maybe voted for someone that didn't even have a chance of winning in a state like maybe Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, I say to them, wow, you really blew it. If you thought that if you now feel like you're uncomfortable with Donald Trump. So we have a self-correcting kind of situation that we can go through where we can vote and we can change things in the next election cycle, and in the next 2 cycles completely change the government. That's something cult members cannot do. They can only vote with their feet. They leave the group if they don't like it because the group is totalitarian, and there is no voting.
Now, in terms of what is the personality profile of someone who is involved in that kind of groupthink?
Well, it could be anybody. You know, I've deprogrammed or done interventions with over 500 people across the U.S. and around the world, including 5 medical doctors. One of those medical doctors was a surgeon, orthopedic surgeon. Another was an anesthesiologist. So these were brilliant people, and I think that one of the things that we do is we victim bash. We like look at cult victims and we say, they're crazy, they're nuts. It would never happen to me. It could never happen to anybody I really care about. And that makes us feel safe. We don't want to deal with the fact that the human mind is fragile and easily persuaded. Look at the power of advertising. Look at the power of celebrity endorsements. Look at how negative political ads affect numbers.
Okay, hold your point, Rick, because you're getting into some interesting topics. A topic. We are coming up on another break. We're listening to Westchester. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio. Our guest is Rick Alan Ross, who is a cult expert and deprogrammer. We're gonna have lots to talk about on the other side of the break. So stay with us, folks. And if you want to call in, it's 914-636-0110.
With world and national news, here is the latest update from Fox News Radio on 1460 WVOX.
Fox News Radio, I'm Rich Dennison. President Trump today announcing a new trade.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back to Westchester Eye on the Radio, our weekly discussion of issues relating to Westchester and the surrounding area. I'm John Sharan, along with Peter Moses and Ardina Seward, and our special call-in guest, Rick Alan Ross, an expert on cults, and we're talking a little bit about how it relates to the current climate, the current culture. And Rick, I was wondering if you could share with us how you think the rise of social media has led to either an increase or a decrease in cults.
Well, I think that it's led to a kind of ubiquitous access that cults now have to us no matter where we are. And they make use of YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I mean, you name it, they're using that medium. And there actually are now cults that I've been tracking online that exist totally online. People that follow a leader that they never meet face-to-face, who give that leader money through PayPal, who follow that leader on social media, and who watch that leader on YouTube. And I mean, YouTube is now starting to police itself regarding hate groups and hate speech and so on, particularly regarding the radicalization of people that may become violent. But I don't think they've even scratched the surface of how some of these groups use social media, YouTube and other vehicles online to suck in people who are, they could be anywhere, and in some cases they pull them into compounds, for example, in Central America, or in an isolated part of Australia, or in Asia. And these stories have come up again and again, and if your listeners would like to follow those stories, you can go to cultnews.net or culteducation.com and read about these groups.
Now, Rick, you've made some very interesting points. With the pervasiveness of the Internet and the opportunity to reach virtually any point on the globe, it seems that cults are greater today and more prevalent today than ever before.
Well, it's a business. I mean, for most of the people, like, let's take Keith Raniere. I mean, he soaked the Bronfman sisters for about, it's estimated, more than $100 million. And he spent about $5 million of it, by the way, suing me for 14 years. Thankfully, I was represented pro bono by attorneys in New Jersey and in Boston, and also by the Harvard Berkman Center and Public Citizen in Washington, and they made it possible for me to survive that litigation. So there's a lot of money in this business model. You could say it's like becoming an object of worship to make money. You become this celebrity personality online. You garner a following, and then you start taking advantage of them financially. And then that can escalate to sexual favors, physical violence, and even criminal behavior, depending on how the leader is. And many of these leaders are not exactly poster boys for mental health.
If somebody out there has a family member who is involved with a cult, what can be done to rescue them?
Well, I think the best thing you can do is educate yourself, and that's why the database culteducation.com exists, and that's why I wrote the book Cults Inside Out, How People Get In, Can Get Out, which is kind of a primer or a manual, if you will, that includes chapters on assessment, coping strategies, preparation for an intervention, and then there's a chapter on defining a destructive cult and explaining what is called cult brainwashing. And just so your listeners understand, when the word expert is used, I think sometimes it can be loosely used. In my case, I have been qualified, accepted, and testified as an expert on what we're discussing in 11 states, including United States federal court. So this has been my work now since 1982. I started because it affected my family, and I just, quite frankly, was pissed off that the group infiltrated a nursing home where my grandmother was a resident, and they targeted the elderly by covertly infiltrating the paid professional staff of a nursing home. So that's the kind of nonsense that goes on, and when these groups do something criminal, they can be arrested, like Keith Raniere, but there is no law against gaining undue influence over people by manipulation and coercion.
But then is there a chance toward violence? I mean, the concern is that there's a fanatical fringe that is developed in the United States as a result of this past election, and there are a lot of questions about how to keep them away from the path to violence or an increase in the violence that we've already seen. So how is that stopped? How do you convince somebody not to go down that road, not to take that political, not to buy into the political hype? How do you do that?
Well, I guess you can just simply say Timothy McVeigh was executed. That is the man responsible for the Oklahoma bombing, which he believed was in retribution for the government's raid on a cult group called the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, led by a psychopath by the name of David Koresh, who raped children. But McVeigh was so caught up in conspiracy theories in a subculture of militias and extremism.
As are a lot
And
of the
even-
Trump fringe.
Yeah, and he ended up killing 168 people in the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma. It was a terrible tragedy. All you can do is inform the public, and if you observe someone who's been radicalized and you think that they pose a danger to the public, it really is your duty and your obligation to report them to law enforcement. And many terrorists have been stopped in the midst of their plans because of people who called in and tipped the FBI or local law enforcement. And I think that's our obligation. Many of these people cannot be dissuaded, but they certainly can be stopped before they do something terrible. And I would remind listeners that, most of the terrorism in the United States, or a good deal of it, has been done by hate groups, white supremacist groups, rather than Islamic groups. And so even though we should be vigilant about Islamic extremists, we should keep in mind that white supremacist groups have a very, very dark history of violence as well.
We have a situation, I think, where a lot of people are out there that, thanks to the internet, they isolate themselves from a lot of its situations, and they don't feel that they interact with people physically as well as they used to. This opens an opportunity out there. How do we reach them and try to make sure that they don't fall prey to things like this?
Well, all you can do is put the information online. I mean, for example, the Cult Education Institute has a video library that is made available through YouTube. So the same medium that is being used by cults to recruit and exploit people can be used by the people that are in jeopardy. They can check out, they can Google a group, they can Google the name of a leader and find the database information that is online about that particular leader. And I would urge anyone who is considering getting involved in something that might even seem controversial to take the time to do a Google search and find out what you may not know about that group or leader.
Well, we're speaking with Rick Allen Ross, a leader in the subject of cults. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio here on WVOX 1460 AM and heard worldwide at WVOX.com. I'm John Charan along with our Dina Seward and Peter Moses, and we'll be back right after a brief Fox News break.
With World at
1460 WVOX.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Charan, and our Dina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back to Westchester Eye on the Radio. This is our last quarter hour. We have with us today Rick Allen Ross. He's a cult expert. And my question to you is, on what John was saying before, with the introduction of life from home via the internet, I'm assuming that the job for cult leaders has been made easier, and the job for anti-cult people like yourself has been made more difficult. Is that true?
Well, it works both ways. I mean, Keith Raniere sued me because of reports done by a clinical psychologist and a psychiatrist that broke down and analyzed what he was doing through NXIVM to manipulate and gain undue influence over people. So those papers being online were really hurting him, he said, and they were causing people to leave and causing people to take a second look before even getting involved. So that was how the internet can work positively. Negatively, you're right. I mean, they can reach into your home. Your kid can be online. He can be on his smartphone, and he can be communicating with a group that could be described as a personality-driven cult, led by some guy or gal that is reaching into your home.
Well, my question for you is,
with your child without your knowledge.
My question is, let's just stick with your buddy Ranieri, did he reach people mostly by live presentations, or was he mostly his cult grew as a result of the internet?
He was a mix. I would say that the web served him very well. He recruited through a very substantial web presence. But he also garnered a following by getting bright, shiny things, that is, celebrities or really rich people with a big name like Bronfman to join, and then they would in turn become his promotional tools to suck in more and more people.
Okay, so let's take that example. He got people like the Bronfmans
and
to buy in, and Catherine Oxenberg's daughter,
right?
To buy in. But what did they do then to spread the word? Was that via the internet, or they had meetings and rallies and in great public spaces? I mean, how did they spread it then?
Well, it spread by word of mouth in Vancouver from actor to actor, and that's how Allison Mack and Kristen Kruk, two actors that had been in Smallville, the Superman series, they got involved, and then other actors became involved as well, and so it was word of mouth and this kind of low key. I am your friend. You trust me. Why don't you come to an introductory meeting? And some of these meetings would take place in people's living rooms.
Is that by the way, is that any different than how Scientology grew originally?
Well, no, it's very similar. In fact, Keith Raniere copied Scientology. He ripped off L. Ron Hubbard's writings and also borrowed heavily from Ayn Rand, EST, or Landmark Education, founded by Werner Erhard. So Raniere was really a kind of a plagiarist and a copyist. And L. Ron Hubbard started with the book Dianetics, which at least was his intellectual property. And then from Dianetics, he extrapolated and created a religion that we now know as Scientology, which has a book value of somewhere in excess of $3 billion.
Why is cult thinking so seductive?
Well, I think that first of all, there is deception. So it's a bait and switch con. So what you think you're buying into, like Allison Mack or the Bronfman sisters, is not what you get in the end. Having said that, certainly there's an appeal that a charismatic leader, Raniere is hardly charismatic, I've met him, but many of the leaders like Werner Erhard or L. Ron Hubbard were very charismatic and attracted people, and then would say, look, I've got an answer for everything. This is a cure-all. Whatever your problem is, whatever issues you have in your life, if you come and let me lead you and basically take over your life, I will take care of you. Everything will be great. Plus, you're going to get a great support system, a group of new friends who are just going to love you. And, that is what often is very appealing.
Rick, looking at your website, culteducation.com, I'm intrigued by a topic that you have on there entitled Cult Ties to U.S. Congresswoman. Maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Oh, well, you're talking about Congressman Gabbard and the Science of Identity, which is an organization that is led by a guru who left the Hare Krishna movement and created his own little group, and his name is Chris Butler. He's an American, and Tulsi Gabbard, Congresswoman Gabbard from Hawaii, became a devoted follower of Chris Butler. Her parents are followers of Chris Butler, and it's hard sometimes to see where her staff ends and his influence begins, because there's such an intertwining there. And I think that's a story that's not very often talked about, that Tulsi Gabbard is seen as just a Hindu. It's not that simple. The Butler group, Butler himself has is a Caucasian. He has his background in Hinduism is the Hare Krishna movement, which has been called a cult by Hindus. So I think Tulsi Gabbard is a very interesting situation. I mean, how much influence does Chris Butler, who is very wealthy leader and lives in Hawaii, lives in Maui, how much influence does he really have over her and what she does, and how deep is are his ties on her staff and so on. I think that's a story that's barely been explored.
Well, that's very interesting. Now, if people want to reach out to you and support your cause and know more about you, how do they do that?
Well, you can simply go online and go to culteducation.com, and you can find the main database, which was launched in 1996. You can follow me on Twitter, and you can link to that through the main site, culteducation.com. You can also see the YouTube and Facebook presence of the Institute, which is a educational 501c3 and a member of the American Library Association. And, of course, people can get my book, Cults Inside Out, which they can download on Amazon through Kindle. And so it's very, very easy to get in touch with.
Point is, he's easy to find. We're going to have to end our conversation with you. We have to talk about our show next week, and I want to just remind you, listeners in New York, about how significant the first week in October, or one day in the first week in October has been. Thank you very, very much for being on our show. We appreciate it. So,
Thank you.
Do either of you know what October 3rd is in New York sports history?
Is this a quiz?
This Wednesday?
This is a quiz.
I'm assuming you do.
Well, simply because of your knowledge and my knowledge of the past, I do believe wasn't that the day of the catch?
No.
No?
No, that was in later in October, or I'm not sure the date in October, but that catch was in the 1954 World Series. October 3rd, 1951, Bobby Thompson hit a 1-0 fastball into the lower deck of the left field stands to give the Giants a 5-4 victory in a playoff game against the Dodgers, a one-game playoff, or a three-game playoff.
The third game.
It was the third game. The Dodgers won Game 2, 10-0. And the Dodgers were favored to win. The Dodgers were up 12.5 games on August 13th of that year, and the Giants won 37 of their last 44 games. And the Dodgers played 540 baseball, so it's not like they collapsed. The Giants just caught fire and never stopped until they got to the World Series and lost in 6. Anyway, Ardina, very quickly, next week.
Next week we are going to have
Pete Harcum.
Pete Harcum on the show. We've had him on before. Pete. We'll call him a repeat. Next week, so tune in for a good political discussion. May have his opponent on too, possibly, but you won't know unless you turn in.
Have a great week.
Westchester Eye on the radio. Bye.